All right, so picture this. Washington just sealed a string of shiny new trade deals with countries all over the world. Victory lap time, right? But then, bam, out of nowhere, America slaps a massive 50% tariff on goods coming in from India. Not 5%, not 10%, 50. That's like telling your strategic partner at a dinner party, "Hey, great to see you, but I'm doubling the cover charge at the door." Why did this happen? Lie now. And what does it mean for two countries that claim to be key allies in the Indo-Pacific? Today we're going deep, because this fight isn't just about tariffs. It's about politics, power, and a whole lot of history. Last month, the Trump administration announced new trade agreements with several nations, removing or lowering tariffs, opening up market access, the whole free trade cheerleader package. But when it came to India, the tone was very different. Talks between U.S. and Indian trade officials broke down over what Washington calls unfair trade practices and non-cooperative policy positions. The result? The U.S. doubled tariffs on a range of Indian exports, from textiles to machinery to certain agricultural products, jumping from 25% to a staggering 50%. India's response was swift and sharp. The Modi government blasted the move as unwarranted and hinted at retaliatory measures. And if you know anything about Prime Minister Narendra Modi's political style, you know he's not the kind of leader who backs down after a press statement. Why this isn't just about tariffs? On the surface, this looks like a standard trade dispute. Two sides arguing about market access, subsidies, and tax policies. But in reality, this fight is loaded with geopolitical weight. The US and India have spent years presenting themselves as partners, counterbalancing China's influence in Asia. They've signed defense agreements, held joint military exercises, and talked endlessly about shared democratic values. So when Washington hits New Delhi with a penalty this big, it's more than just an economic slap. It's a political signal. It says, we're willing to challenge you, even if you're one of our closest friends in the region. Let's rewind. The US-India relationship really began warming up in the early 2000s. After decades of Cold War distance, India leaning toward the Soviet bloc, America backing Pakistan, the two countries began finding common ground. Washington saw India as a rising power, a tech and manufacturing hub, and, let's be honest, a massive consumer market. New Delhi saw the U.S. as a counterweight to China and a source of investment and defense technology. Over the past 20 years, they've signed big trade and defense deals, joined together in regional security groups like the Quad, and expanded people-to-people ties, think students, tech workers, and cultural exchange. Yes, there were spats along the way, visa issues, market restrictions, and occasional WTO disputes, but nothing that seriously threatened the overall partnership. Until now. Here's where things took a turn. In recent negotiations, U.S. officials pushed India to lower tariffs on American agricultural products, allow more U.S. tech companies into its market without strict data localization rules, and cut back on subsidies for certain industries. India pushed back hard. The Modi government argued that protecting domestic farmers, controlling its digital economy, and supporting local industries were non-negotiable parts of its economic sovereignty. When both sides refused to budge, the talks collapsed. And then came the U.S. announcement. Tariffs on Indian goods would jump from 25% to 50%. For some products, that's basically pricing them out of the American market. India's trade ministry immediately warned of countermeasures, which could include higher tariffs on American wine, motorcycles, and agricultural exports. And, if you've been around long enough to remember the 2019 Harley-Davidson tariff drama, you know these things can get personal fast. If you're getting a little déjà vu, you're not alone. India's current foreign policy, especially under Modi, has shades of a much older strategy, the non-aligned movement. that Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru championed back in the 1950s and 60s. Back then, the Cold War split the world into two camps, one led by the US, the other by the Soviet Union. Nehru's idea was simple but radical. India would align with neither. Instead, it would act independently, making decisions based on its own national interests, not the dictates of Washington or Moscow. Fast forward to today, and while the global map has changed, the philosophy hasn't disappeared. Modi might not be waving the non-alignment banner, but his government has been playing a careful balancing act, buying advanced defense equipment from the US, but also purchasing discounted oil from Russia despite Western sanctions, joining US-led initiatives in the Indo-Pacific, but refusing to take a hardline stance on China that could jeopardize India's own economic ties. So when Washington pushes India to fall in line, whether it's on Russia, digital policy, or agricultural imports, Modi's default position is, "We'll decide what's best for us, thank you very much." And in this tariff dispute, that independence is front and center. Let's be fair here. Washington isn't just slapping tariffs for the fun of it. U.S. trade officials argue that India maintains some of the highest average tariff rates among major economies. American exporters, especially in agriculture and tech, have long complained about barriers that make it harder to sell their products in India. On top of that, there's a domestic political angle. In an election year, both Republicans and Democrats want to look tough on trade, showing American voters they'll stand up to countries that block U.S. goods. Tariffs play well in certain swing states, where manufacturing and farming are major employers. And let's not forget the broader strategic frustration. U.S. officials see India as a crucial partner in countering China, but they also see New Delhi making moves that undercut Western sanctions on Russia and refusing to side fully with the U.S. on key global votes. For some policymakers, a little economic pressure is a way to remind India which side of the fence Washington expects it to stand on. Now, if you think India is going to just take this lying down, think again. Modi's political brand is built on projecting strength, both at home and abroad. Being seen as giving in to U.S. demands would be politically toxic, especially in the run-up to India's own elections. So far, India's response has been measured but firm. They've signaled potential retaliatory tariffs on U.S. products, motorcycles, wines, nuts, and other goods that hit politically sensitive American industries. And they're making it clear this isn't just about economics, it's about sovereignty. One senior Indian official put it bluntly, partnership does not mean submission. In other words, India wants the benefits of its U.S. relationship without being told how to run its trade or foreign policy. Let's talk numbers for a second. The U.S. is India's single largest export market, accounting for roughly 17 to 18% of India's total exports. Losing competitiveness there would hurt Indian businesses, especially in textiles, jewelry, and certain engineering goods. On the flip side, India is a growing market for U.S. goods and services, everything from machinery to agricultural products to tech services. If India retaliates with tariffs, it could squeeze American exporters, especially in niche markets they've worked years to develop. And remember, tariffs aren't just about trade flows, they're about prices. A 50% tariff on Indian goods means higher costs for U.S. importers and eventually American consumers. That's not exactly great news for an economy still battling inflation. So where does this go from here? I see three broad possibilities. Quick de-escalation. Behind the scenes, negotiators could hammer out a compromise. Maybe India lowers certain tariffs slightly, the U.S. rolls back some of its increases, and both sides declare victory. This is the politically safe option, but it requires both governments to swallow some pride. Prolonged tit for tat. Tariffs go up on both sides, new sectors get pulled into the fight, and the dispute drags on for months. This risks damaging not just trade, but also the broader strategic partnership, linkage to bigger geopolitics. The tariff issue could become a bargaining chip in other negotiations, say, defense cooperation, tech investment, or even India's position on Russia and China. In this case, the solution might not even be about trade at all. If this were just about tariffs, it would be serious, but manageable. What makes it more complicated is that it's happening at a moment when the US is trying to rally allies in Asia against China's growing influence. If Washington and New Delhi can't keep their economic relationships stable, it risks undermining their whole strategic play in the Indo-Pacific. China, by the way, is probably enjoying this. Every inch of daylight between the US and India is an opportunity for Beijing to nudge New Delhi toward more independent positions, which often means less alignment with American priorities. The US-India tariff fight isn't a random flare-up. It's a stress test for one of the most important strategic relationships in the 21st century. Both sides have strong domestic and political reasons to hold their ground, but they also have far more to gain from cooperation than from escalation. The next few months will tell us whether Washington and New Delhi can manage this like partners, or whether pride and politics will push them into a deeper economic rift. And here's the thing. In global politics, fights like this rarely happen in isolation. This could be the opening chapter in a much bigger story, one that pulls in Russia, China, and the entire balance of power in Asia. So, will cooler heads prevail, or are we watching the start of a full-blown US-India trade war? Keep your eyes on the headlines, because the answer could reshape not just economics, but the geopolitics of the entire Indo-Pacific. And when that happens, we'll be right here breaking it down for you.